if you were to ask me what is leadership, just boil it down to one thing, it's influence. It's the ability of someone to influence somebody else. And how do I have influence with people? It's not by being direct, right? It's not by trying to force them to do something. It's by having a good relationship with them, being a good communicator, showing them that I care about their success, and being a good mentor. And one of the things that probably too frequently I have to point out with people is, well, this is the way that it just is. This is the way that it's always been. That, this is how it was when I came into the workplace. And then I'll just ask them, whoever's saying that, I'll ask them this question: did you like that experience? And what do they all say? No, it was miserable. Okay, well, why are you trying to force that?
Yeah.
You can change it. And I'm not saying they get to get away with whatever they want, but if you didn't like the experience of getting talked down to and berated and yelled and screamed at, why on earth would you try to treat this other person in that same way? Like, there's a better way of doing business that's going to make them feel like a part of the team. And that's when you're starting to succeed, is when they feel like they're contributing, when they feel like the people around them have their best interests at hand.
You're listening to the Born Primitive Podcast. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Born Primitive Podcast. How we doing, Tony?
Morning, Bear.
Did you get it in this morning?
Got it in.
All right. I didn't, but I did cold tub, and I'm hitting it later. So you got to give me a rain check there. All right. So this morning, we got an in-person guest, which is so much better for us. A guest that I personally know, Sean Glass, did 13 years in the SEAL teams as an officer. Then became COO of a construction company, and is a current leadership instructor at Echelon Front. Is also the founder of Primal Beef, is a farm-raised beef business out of the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, and they selling online. So Sean and I have a backstory. We'll get into that in a minute. But Sean, thanks for making the trip, man. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
So I want to give the quick backstory of Sean Glass. For me, it was Lieutenant Glass. I don't even know if you remember that. I mean, you probably did this a bunch. So
I did it more than once, but I definitely remember it.
And I think I want to start with this because I know we're going to get into kind of business leadership, and I think I literally use this analogy all the time. Tony's probably sick of me saying it to our group. But for the listeners, I was in SEAL training, just a bald-headed wannabe trying to learn the craft, and we were in the third phase of the training, which is out on an island. And this is where you start to learn a little bit of the craft. You're learning shooting, combatives. You start learning the basics of land warfare, and in that land warfare block, you go on a little patrol as a squad, and you have guns, but of course they're blanks, and the instructors will set up scenarios, and they'll be like the bad guys, and they'll ambush you, and they see how you react with your element. And since I was an officer, I was in charge of calling out what we were going to do, once we got contacted by the fake enemy here. So it was like our first run, we're all fired up. We think we're all cool. We got our H gear on. You know what I mean? We got our, I think, little boonie hats or whatever we're wearing. We got camo. We think we're cool, right?
It's the first time in Budge you get to do anything remotely tactical.
Yes.
It's just beat down before that.
I remember just getting H gear. We thought we were the coolest guys ever.
I still thought the day that I got that H gear, I was like, I've arrived.
Yeah,
this
exactly.
Is it. Yeah.
I have blanks in my magazines, and I think I'm a freaking badass, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we do this first patrol, and of course, it's set up for failure. We get contacted. And we all start shooting back like we're supposed to, and nothing happens, and we just get totally flanked, and we all fake die or whatever. And me as the leader of the element should have been making the call on what the heck we were going to do, but since I had never done it before, of course, I had no freaking clue. And when we debriefed the run, Sean was there at the time, Lieutenant Glass, who was running that third phase cell, and pulled the officers aside and said, hey, your guys' job is not to be on the gun. In that moment, whoever's leading the element needs to step off the firing line and see where the hell you're going. So when we did the next run, you took my gun away from me, which I was obviously mad at first. And you said, all right, for this run, don't worry about any shooting. When you guys get contacted, just take a step back, take 15 seconds, orient yourself, find terrain, and maneuver to it. Maneuver your element out of the situation, improve your fighting position. And so, that next run we did it. And I think that one was set up in a way, there was a really easy terrain feature, to the east that you could easily flank to. It was an obvious for anyone who's done land warfare, that's where we should flank. You know what I mean? But for someone who's never done it, maybe not as obvious. And we did it, and we said it, and then we ended up flanking around the hill and coming over it, and it was done right. And I think while this is a very military specific example, there's so many analogies to business, particularly as you grow a business where you have to do that. And I think in the early years, you're the only element. It's a one-man element, right? So you have to do the shooting and the maneuvering. But as you grow your team, particularly when you're the founder, and I still struggle with this, there's going to become a time where you have to pull yourself off the line and be the one looking for terrain, right? And of course, in a business analogy, that's a much different thing. But if you're in the trenches with your team all the time, doing that stuff, and you're quote unquote on the gun, no one is maneuvering the element of what's next and how do we improve our position. And as you know, Tony, like that's something I still struggle with a little bit. I mean, I'm very involved. Obviously, we were just doing the D-Day planning,
we all do. Yeah.
And we're all in the trenches. And I think there's a time for that. But when you were kind of the original quote unquote subject matter expert, because you were literally the only one, so by default you were the original subject matter expert, it's hard to pull yourself off the line. And, to maybe use a ship analogy, it'd be like, if the captain of the ship, if there was an engineering problem down in the engine room, and the captain of the ship was like, who maybe was an engineer in his early days, like wanted to go down there and start turning wrenches with the engineering team, like that is not the best use of his time, particularly if it was a dynamic situation like at war or something, right? Like he needs to be up on the bridge figuring out what the hell the battle plan is, right? So I kind of want to start with that, and it was just really cool, when you're just a young, like in training, we saw you guys as like walking on water, you know what I mean? Like it was the coolest thing. Like you're not that far away from becoming that, but just as you probably know, because you were in that position once, you see those guys as like gods, you know what I mean? And that was such a cool lesson. And so when we linked up recently, I genuinely remembered how much you cared, and you were one of those guys. And I think that whole third phase was awesome. Of like they really were invested in developing the next generation of team guys. And so
I had a killer crew at that third phase cell, and third phase is unique in the way of you really can invest in the guys. I think really for the first time in training. First phase, it's just survive. And if you're an instructor, you're not putting a lot of investing in different people in first phase, because 90% of them aren't going to be there the next week. Second phase, it's kind of the same thing. You get to invest a little bit more in them, but you got pool comp, you got all these other things. And then you guys get to third phase and you can actually invest in them, because like you said, you're barring anything major, those guys are going to be your teammates.
Yep.
So there's still very much the instructor-student relationship, but now you can really start to invest in them. And that lesson that you just talked everybody through is my favorite lesson that I taught ever in my career and we call it detaching, the ability to stay detached. And from what I saw, and what I see right now in business as well, is the number one skill that is going to determine if a leader is going to be successful or not is their ability to stay detached. Detached from not just necessarily the day-to-day mechanisms of the company, because like y'all said, there's times when you have to get down and in, but detached from emotional-based decisions, detached from your biases, detached from your ego. The more that you can stay detached as a leader, the better it's going to suit you. And to get to pass those lessons on in the teams in third phase to young studs like yourself quickly, right at the beginning of their career is one of my favorite things. And, to take people back to that time and place, I want to talk through a couple different things. So unless I'm wrong and I'm remembering things differently, which I don't think I am, we didn't put you guys in two separate scenarios for those ambushes, because we would only teach the IADs on one range. We only could use one range for IADs.
Yep.
It probably seemed like two different scenarios because of your perspective of what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we took that gun away from you and you made the call, had you ever made any type of like tactical call before in your life?
Never.
Yeah. But how did it work out?
It was good because I could actually just, I oriented myself to the situation, and then it's not necessarily common sense, but with the classes you guys had taught us, it was like, okay, I'm applying like an academic learning to now this, but my bandwidth is not getting sucked by me just trying to shoot blanks back at instructors who are shooting at us.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that's the big lesson of detachment, is even if you're not perfected in that skill set, even if you're not a master of that skill set, if you stay detached, the answer just kind of shows up. We say it almost allows you to predict the future. If you can stay detached, whether it's in business or your personal life, when you can have that detached perspective, you can almost genuinely see things that are about to unfold and make the right call to stop them from happening. So If you're detached in business, you can see trends before other people see it. You can see mistakes that maybe you're going to walk into and cut it off ahead of time. But it all stems from that ability to just stay detached.
Yeah, and I think what it does, I saw this in the platoon, is as you delegate that down, the leaders below you become so much more proficient. So, let's say now we're doing IADs at land warfare in a SEAL platoon at Chaffee. We had 2 squads. We would get contacted. The 2 squad leaders were immediately knowing, all right, one's base, 2's flanking. You know what I mean? And it literally came out within 10 seconds on the radio, and our platoon chief could just kind of watch it happen. And then, okay, maybe when you start getting a secondary contact, then maybe he intervenes a little bit and like guides what we're doing. But that immediate contact, because it had been delegated down, those guys then, possessed the, developed the ability to make those fast calls. And it became crystal clear for everyone, down to the fire team level, shooter level, that like, okay, okay, cool. 2s are online, 1s are flanking up that hill, and then we're going to, assault through the, you know what I mean? Like it was like everyone knew immediately what was happening the more we repped it. And it wasn't this like one guy like, okay, I need 2s to drop to an E and shoot
there.
Yeah.
You over there.
Where I think a lot of like civilians think like that's how it is. But the more you can kind of, I think you guys call it decentralizing the command over time, that makes the organization, better at everything. And I think that's definitely true with business, because I think a lot of businesses likely do the opposite. And maybe in the short term, it works, but eventually there's going to be so much task delegation that needs to happen. It's not sustainable. You know what I mean?
And that ability to decentralize and to empower people on the team to take action is what is going to determine ultimately your success, whether it's in, warfare or in business, because one person can't make all the decisions. It's not, you watch a movie and it's almost always like, the officer with the sword or whatever, making the decisions. Like that's a recipe for disaster on a battlefield. And it's a recipe for disaster in business as well, because problems don't typically start. Let's take business. Problems don't typically start at the C-suite level. Like, where do problems typically start in any business? It's on the ground, wherever the product is, wherever the interaction is. So if your people on the ground are not trained to take action and move swiftly and make decisions, then you're losing all this opportunity. You're going to get outpaced. And it's the same thing in the military. If guys have to wait for the officer or the platoon chief to make the call, 3/4 of your platoon is going to get wiped out before the first call even gets made. And later in my career, when I was running the wartime training for the West Coast SEAL teams, and I was putting the platoons through training, I would have a test that I would do some point in time in the training cycle for the platoon. And the test was, I was trying to see if the platoon was doing a good job of being decentralized. And the test was, I would just kill the leader in not in real life, but in the
down man
exercise.
right in the beginning.
Put him down man at the beginning and just watch what happened. And good platoons, what happened was, it didn't matter. It literally did not make any difference whatsoever, because guys knew what to do and they were making stuff happen. Some of the times they didn't even realize their leader was down until like 3/4 of the run was done or the training was done.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh shoot, Chief was dead.
That's
the
awesome.
whole time. Or like,
That's
the
awesome.
Was dead. The opposite scenario was everything would just grind to a halt. No one would be comfortable making any decisions. And then what would happen? Our guys, our trainers that were playing the bad guys, would just wipe the field with everybody.
Yeah, everyone would start going down.
Everyone would go down.
And then it's a complete shit show.
100. We'd end up resetting the entire platoon or just stopping it and restarting, because if there's only one person on that, whether it's in business, whether it's in warfare, whether it's in your personal life, like if there's only one person that's a decision maker, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example, because I think that likely falls on, in that case, the platoon chief and the OIC, because maybe that platoon chief might have been shit hot, and maybe that's why he was making all the calls, so it made the platoon look good. But as soon as you put him down, that platoon is not set up now to like just run the show without him. And so probably a lesson learned for him, for hey, you got to start letting your guys make calls. And you know what I mean? There's gonna be a time where you got to obviously step in, maybe as things get more dynamic. But for the most part, like you got to let your squad leaders and even fire team leaders like make individual decisions based on just general intent, right? And that's such a good lesson.
And it also, from a leadership perspective, makes your life as a leader so much easier, because then you can focus on the things that you need to focus on. I mean, just imagine if you were trying to run every single thing at Born Primitive. Like you would never have time to work out. You never have time for a family life. You never have time to do anything else. And the business probably wouldn't be successful. But by having good people on your team, giving them the training that they need, utilizing decentralized command and giving them the ability to make decisions and make things happen, you've got time. You've got time to then do what leaders should be doing, which is looking up and out, looking at potential pitfalls that are coming up that we can avoid or opportunities that we can take advantage of. But it would blow my mind in the military, and now when I work with businesses, when leaders are trying to do everything, I'm like, you're making your life so hard, and you're cutting off your team's ability to get stuff done, which is ultimately going to lead to not a lot of success in the long run.
And have you found, and it may be, I don't even know if this is conscious at times, but I've noticed it almost becomes a distraction where they're as leaders, you'll tell yourself you need to stay in the trenches on that, almost as a way to not have to address the bigger picture things, the risks, the pitfalls. And it's a rationalization that becomes extremely dangerous in the sense of you're not doing it because the team needs it. You're doing it because you've convinced yourself that you have to be there or it won't get done. Yep. And then guess what is usually happening within that team dynamic? They're all talking about how, God, if he would just get out of here, or she would just get out of here, we could be creative then. It's an ultimate constrictor on creativeness as well, because the team then feels like, as you said earlier, that they're not able to make decisions on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. And why do leaders gravitate to doing the stuff on the ground? Why do they do that?
Maybe
they've done it.
That's what they know.
Yeah, they've done it.
That's what they know. Yeah. It feels good. I know I can get it done. I get the quick win in. Meanwhile, the ship's literally burning behind me. But, I'm taking care of this one little problem that I know how to take care of, and no one's steering the ship. So it's a natural tendency for humans to want to gravitate towards the things that they're good at. And that's one of the biggest pitfalls that we see now when we work with different companies is usually not with the senior leadership, usually not with them. It's usually they've promoted a bunch of hard charging guys and gals from the front line, and now they're leaders. They put them in a leadership position. And what are they defaulting to? They're defaulting to what made them good at their job before, which was getting things done. I've got this skill set, I want to apply it. Well, now it's like, well, no, that's not your job anymore. You've got people that can handle that. Your job is to lead the team, to guide the team, to set the conditions so they can be successful. And like y'all said, there's times where we need to jump down and in to help out, to provide a little guidance, but as quick as I can, I want to pull back out. It's a hard transition. We call it the buddy to boss transition. It's a hard the teams go through it every 2 years because you've got a 2-year cycle in the SEAL teams where you're changing positions every 2 years. And if you're an enlisted guy, you can find yourself being a senior E6 one day and then the lead petty officer the next day.
Yep.
That's a hard transition to make because if you're kept in that same platoon, you're now leading your boys who, 6 months ago, you were just all equals.
Yep.
So people make bad decisions and they fall into this pitfall of either one, defaulting towards the things that made them a good E6 and not trying to be a good leader, or the bigger pitfall that I usually see is they try to be somebody that they weren't 5 seconds ago. So now it's like, well, I'm the LPO now. And, 30 seconds ago, Bear and I were boys clearing houses together. But now no, I'm in charge.
Yep.
So now
it's like an overcorrection.
Oh, big time overcorrection, right? Well, I can't let Bear and Tony think that I make mistakes. Even though they're like, bro, you made literally every mistake you could make when you were in E6. You're not going to hide from us those facts. So there's a couple of big challenges you have to navigate there. That first transition from being the doer to being the leader. But the good thing is it's really not that hard to make that transition if you just do a couple things. And one of the big things is let your people do what they're good at and just don't get in their way.
And I always, the way I train a lot of my team is be a beacon. Once you're in a leadership position, of course, there's things you need to be doing. And that's what we're talking about. You're still going to have to get in there every once in a while. But as you said before, you need to be whatever working out looks like for you. You need to be sleeping. You need to be taking care of yourself because now more than you even being able to get shit done, you need to be somebody the team looks up to. That's what I've found. Yeah. That transition from being a doer to a leader, that's such a huge part of it that I don't hear enough people talking about is you just need to be something for the team to look up and have an ideal almost of hey, even if you're doing a little less and you're taking more time to work out and take care of yourself, that actually for your team will make you sustainable over time, as opposed to the opposite example of we said of you're still in the trenches, you're still trying to make too many calls, you're almost pushing the team too hard. It's there's a time to push, but there's also a time for you to be the one kind of sitting there that they lean on anytime something's going wrong. That's when they should be coming to you, not in the day-to-day.
Yeah. And there's, it's another pitfall that leaders can fall into is, well, I'm going to be viewed as lazy. by the crew if I'm not in there helping them out all the time. And look, there's a time for that stuff. There's 100% a time for that stuff. You shouldn't be the guy or gal that's in your rack when the crew's out doing the heavy lifting. Like you should go do some heavy lifting with them. But the reality is they don't want you there 24/7. Like,
yeah, exactly.
You might think they want you there 24/7. It doesn't matter how much they love you, how good of a boss you are, how great you are at your job. They don't want you there 24/7. They want
at some point you're not one of the boys anymore.
Exactly right. You got to be comfortable with that, right? Like they want you doing the things that only you can do. And as a leader, that's what you should be doing, is the things that only you can do. And that is leading the team, whether you're the CEO, the founder, or whether you're, a frontline leader that's maybe in your first management position. You should be focused on the things that only you can do, not the things that other people can handle for you.
Well, in mining for insights, that's what I always say. Go mine for insights as a leader, because that's the goal you'll give your team then. But if you're not doing that yourself, if you're not at the cutting edge of like going and figure out new tactics to help the team, or even just personal stuff to like, hey, here's some dumb shit I tried, give it a try. That's when you start to build. They start to look up to you because they're like, damn, my life's better because he's bringing insights from shit that he's testing. Like that to me is like what starts to distinguish a real leader. Then it's like, hey, it's not even just about work anymore. Just my personal life is getting better being around this person. And that's where you build a trust that like they'll do anything for you then. Do you know what I mean? And that's real leadership.
Yeah. And that's what we're almost getting back to the subject of detachment, because you're staying detached as a leader from the day-to-day things. And another benefit of that is you can identify things that might be problems or opportunities that your people aren't going to see because they're doing the work day to day. They're in there focused on the problem. And you can come in as a leader and you might be able to identify that problem in just a couple of seconds. And it's not because you're smarter than them. And it's not because you have, some unique insight they don't have. It's because you're not staring at the problem 24/7. Mm-hmm. So you can come in and identify things. And the benefit to you is then you look really smart, even if you're not like me. Like, I'm not the smartest guy, but I got to look really smart every now and then by coming in and just, it's like typing a paper back in school, or a report that, we'd have to do as officers in the military all too often, or even a plan. Like I can look at that plan for 4 days straight and I'm like, this plan is rock solid. And then Barrett can walk over and be like, hey man, why are you putting your guys right here? And I'm like, I actually don't know why I'm putting that guy with it. But it's not because he's a tactical genius, which you probably were, but it's because you haven't been staring at that problem. You have the detached perspective. You can identify those problems a lot easier. And that's what you need to be doing for your team, is those, we would call them points of friction. Like those points of friction, you want to help them get in there and solve. And then as quick as you can, get back out to doing your job.
Yeah, I think another thing that I've seen, and this is probably more for like mid-level leaders, so in an organization, maybe director level or even VP. But then when we were in the teams, this was like my biggest pet peeve is senior officers that weren't so senior yet that they could obviously run the show. So it'd maybe be like a troop commander or a platoon OIC talking to the skipper, right? There were so many times where that junior level leader had the opportunity to push back on something that their boss said, because he possessed additional information that the boss didn't have, that had you brought it up, he would have changed his stance, right? So let's say the skipper says, hey, I need you guys to, come in on Saturday to do this. I mean, this is a dumb example, but that, lieutenant has a bunch of information that the skipper isn't tracking and saying, hey, sir, I see what you're saying. I don't recommend we do that because of X, Y, Z. Instead of just saying, oh yes, sir, we'll do that. And then you got to go brief the boys, and it like makes no sense because that guy doesn't have all the information. So I think as mid-level leaders in any organization, you have to be the one that insulates the people below you from maybe senior leadership making decisions that aren't fully informed, and having the balls to let them know what they don't know. And you guys obviously here at BP, should do that with me. Like if I come in last second, I want to change the plan because I only know 10% of what's going on, but I think I know it all. That's where you as the VP need to say, no, Barry, you're full of shit. Here's why we're not doing that. Or here's why I don't recommend we do that. Your call, but like, what do you think? And then I'd go, oh shit, I wasn't tracking that. In lieu of that, stick with the plan. My bad. I'll stay out of your shit. But I saw that so much, and then it's just all the boys are so deflated because it's whatever it was like, man. Oh, he doesn't know, you know what I mean? And it's like, well, that was your opportunity to tell him. That's why you're an officer. Like,
he doesn't know, or
grow some balls,
or our leader didn't have either the guts or the relationship that he needed to be able to bring that up. And
yes,
if you're in a middle leadership position, you've got, in my opinion, the hardest job in the organization, because you have to lead up the chain of command. You have to lead down the chain of command. You have to lead your peers at times, and you're a conduit. What your job is you need to be a conduit of information, or what one of your jobs is. Let's take the SEAL team example. Your commanding officer of the SEAL team is paid to make decisions. And what are they using to make that decision? They're using information. Whether that is the right information, the wrong information, the most up-to-date information is to be seen. And if your boss doesn't have the right information, ultimately, whose fault is that? If I'm a troop commander and my boss doesn't have the reality on the ground, that's not his fault. That's 1,000% my fault, because his job isn't to be on the ground. His job is to lead the team and make decisions for the team. So I have to have the ability, one, to have a good enough relationship with my guys on the ground. Because for people who maybe aren't familiar, a troop commander is basically like 4 levels of leadership up from the guy on the ground in a SEAL platoon, and then really 1 level of leadership away from the commanding officer. So you have to have the ability to have such a good relationship with the guys on the ground that you're getting all that realistic information. And then you have to have the ability to have a good enough relationship with your commanding officer where you can then give them that information and give it to them in a way that they're going to be open to that information. And there's so many different things that go into that, but it all hinges on the relational aspect of leadership. I was very fortunate when I was a troop commander and I had a phenomenal, just outstanding commanding officer. My master chief, the command master chief, was also just top notch. And I had a great relationship with him. So whenever I wouldn't even say push back, but whenever I brought things up that was maybe counter to the way that they wanted to do things, we had a discussion about it. And I really can't think of maybe more than one time when they didn't go with whatever information I brought up. And I could give you a litany of examples, not because they were wrong in their decision making, but they don't have the ground truth information. Mm-hmm. You have to have the ability to translate that up the chain of command. But even if I have the right information, if I don't have influence with my boss, if I don't have a good relationship with my boss, what are the odds that they're going to trust and listen to what I have to say? So you have a really, really hard job if you're somewhere in the middle, because mm-hmm. one, I've got to have a great relationship with you. I've got to have a great relationship with my people. And I have to have the ability through that relationship, or really I shouldn't say have to, now that I have those good, strong relationships, now I have the ability to take that ground truth information and pass it up the chain of command so that my leadership can make good decisions.
Yeah, that's such a good summary. And I mean, that's even more amplified in maybe a combat scenario, right? Maybe the CO is making a call on the net that on the ground you're seeing, you're like, this is not, and now you have to convey that in a very succinct manner, like on SATCOM, right? You don't, it's not like you can pull you guys can step aside and talk about it for 10 minutes. Nope. You have to very briefly and to the point summarize why, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that takes that to a whole nother level.
And
did you ever experience that
in
real time?
For sure.
But you had that relationship predetermined. And so there was already some trust there, which I'm sure is critical for like real life shit, right?
That's what it is. Yeah. It's the trust. So I had that more than once, and every single time it was a quick and easy decision. I didn't have that as a new guy. As a new guy, we deployed to Afghanistan for 11 months. We're working with an Army Special Operations Task Force, not our own leadership. And just as a new guy, I didn't really know the importance of building those good relationships. So I didn't have an antagonistic relationship. I just didn't have a relationship. Mm-hmm. In my mind, I'm like, this Lieutenant JG, first combat experience. And you've got these colonels that are sitting up here in this office. I'm like, I don't want anything. Those guys are scary. Man.
Yeah,
I don't want anything to do with those guys.
Oh yeah,
right?
Screw that.
Yeah, no way.
I'm gonna go hit the gym.
Yeah, exactly right. Like, no way. I'm staying in my little bubble. But I had good leaders, and they were able to open my aperture and show me, like, you got to have a good relationship with those people. So throughout my career, my number one job that I tried to do as a leader was build good relationships with everybody, but specifically with my boss, because you can't go back and retroactively do those things. So I I also worked with people who did not have a good relationship with the commanding officer or with their boss. Maybe you're a platoon commander and your boss is now the troop commander. And our experiences were very different because there was not that trust there. And, those easy, the conversations on the radio become much easier if you've laid the groundwork through that relationship for trust and influence.
Yeah.
If you haven't, then just stand by for a lot of pushback and a lot of direction from on high.
Well, and it's the difference too, as a leader, the difference between curiosity and ego, meaning like if I have somebody underneath me come to me, I challenge myself every time. Be curious, never, because the ego, especially if it's pushback on what you think the best decision is, it's so easy for that ego to flare up and instantly you don't have all the information. You don't know this. So what does that do right there? It stymies the whole conversation. And then in the future, what's that person going to do? They're not coming to you again because it's hard. Like if they have to do that every day where every time they go to their boss, it's a shit show of a conversation. They're like, I got to pick and choose my battles then. And that actually is a miserable place for a boss, a subordinate relationship to be. Whereas curiosity, even if it's something you think is dumb as hell, you give them the time to speak it out, work it out, and then you deliver some tactful feedback of like, hey, no, for these reasons, we're going to stick the course. They're like, hey, if nothing else, I feel heard. And the difference between how those two things play out in the long run is two completely different systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Your ego as a leader is going to be the number one barrier to you being good at your job, like hands down. If you look at all the negative things that happen when you've got ego's bad for the team in general, but especially if it's coming from a leader. What's the real job of a leader? It's to empower the team to get stuff done. So you should be keeping the focus on the team. You should be keeping the focus on the mission, whatever the mission is, whether it's your team or whether it's in the military, whether it's your company or whether it's in the military. You have a goal, you have a mission. If I have a big ego, it's not about the team. It's not about the mission. What it's about me and my ego. So I'm going to lose focus on those things. I'm not going to be good at building relationships because no one likes trying to build a relationship with someone that's an egomaniac. Like you said, we try to avoid them. We don't want to go to them with information. We want to, kind of try to get out of conversations with them as quickly as possible. There's all of these negative things that happen when you have an ego from a leadership perspective. And probably the worst thing is you can't assess yourself. And it doesn't matter how long you've been doing the job, you're going to make mistakes. That's okay, as long as you have the humility to learn from those mistakes. But if you've got a big ego, you don't think you make mistakes. The unfortunate thing for your team is, what are they suffering through the entire time?
Yeah.
All of your freaking mistakes that you're making and you're going to continue to make because you can't assess yourself.
And what's your mechanism as you identify, as you're doing maybe consulting for a business or how do you, or in your military experience, what's your mechanism for kind of working through? Because that one, more than like a delegation, if you find like, oh, he's a great leader, he's just a little too in the trenches, that's more black and white. Whereas when you start to deal with the subtlety of like somebody's ego, how do you approach kind of addressing one?
I just tell them they have a huge ego.
Really? No. Okay. I didn't know. That would be, man, you guys come in hot.
Listen, you're horrible. That would be, that would be the opposite of what we'd want to do. So it goes back to the relationship thing. The only chance that I have or anybody has of getting someone that might be suffering from lack of humility, the only chance that we have to be able to get them to maybe start to come to terms with the fact that they need to work on that is through a relationship. If I don't have a relationship with you, it doesn't matter how true the statement is, and it doesn't matter how good my intention is, you're never taking that on board, ever. Over time, we develop a relationship, and really, what are the keys to a relationship? There's trust there. There's some mutual respect there. There's the ability to influence each other starts to come into play. Now I can start to maybe broach the subject of some things that we need to work on. Even when the relationship is rock solid, I'm still not just going to come out and be like, Barry, you have a huge ego, man. Because it's what happens when someone says something like that.
Fangs come out.
Yeah, the fangs come out. The walls come up. I get defensive. So I would use what we call the indirect approach, which would be to try to flank, to use a military term, to instead of approaching the problem head on, trying to flank them with that information and try to get them maybe to see themselves that they have some issues that they can work through. And anytime someone can come to that determination themselves, it's going to be better, right? It's, I'm married, got 5 kids. My wife is literally the best woman I've ever met in my entire life. She knows for a fact that if she just comes to me and says, this is what we should do, my natural instinct is going to be like, No, we're doing the opposite. And it doesn't matter. It's not because I don't ultimately like respect everything she has to say. That's just my personal tendency is I don't like being told what to do. It's been that way my whole life. I think probably most team guys are like kind of anti-authoritarian.
100%.
So you come and tell us something, even if it's a good thing, we're like, don't tell me what to do. So she knows for a fact, even if it's a really good thing for me, it's going to be a harder conversation than if she just walks me into seeing it myself. So she's a little ninja like
Nice.
that. So yeah,
Doing Jedi mind
doing
tricks
Jedi
on you.
mind tricks on me. Yeah.
Making you think
I'm
like
on to you, babe.
You came up with a good
exactly
idea.
right.
Yeah, there you
She's
go.
a master at it.
That's a good point.
And as you're working, let's use the company example again. Do you suss that out just on a personal, like whoever's the one actually there kind of consulting for that company? Do you do it through team members and start to build a story based off like maybe you're talking to 10 team members, and if you get the same feedback from 10 team members, you're like, hey, there's something here. What's kind of the mechanism for
It's
that?
a little bit of both.
Yeah.
It's definitely a bit of both. You know, you're talking to the team, you're getting a sense for things. The team will let you in on some insights, but someone with a big ego, it doesn't take a long time to figure out that there's some ego at play. And look, we all have ego. And I'm not saying ego is a bad thing in and of itself. There wouldn't be a SEAL teams if there wasn't ego. There wouldn't be a Born Primitive if there wasn't ego, because it's driving you to do something creative, you know, to push your boundaries, to maybe give you some confidence at times when you're not feeling very confident. So it can be a very good thing. We just have to make sure we're using it in the right fashion. But it's not that hard really to get a sense of how someone's leading. Are they leading from a genuine place of wanting to empower others, or is there some ego at play?
Yeah, and I think the good thing about the SEAL teams is there was always a badder dude than you in the room. So like, I feel like ego kind of took care of itself. And then if there was a guy out of line, I would argue we did not take the approach you take with your clients, which is for good reason.
Yeah, a little bit of directness.
In the SEAL
there.
teams, it would be very direct.
Yeah.
You'd say, hey, motherfucker. You know what I mean? Like, and it would be dealt with. And I love that because it was so black and white on. Now I think some guys had to come around to that style of being communicated to, but I think by the time you get into a platoon, you've been groomed because training was so savage that, like, you know what I mean? Like,
and
you're just, you're hardened up to receive that kind of information, and just hopefully most guys would take it head on.
Yeah.
And be like, all right, I got to humble myself and kind of like reset and, earn respect back if I've, maybe done something fucked up.
And most guys do. Most guys take that on board. One, because they know the person that's telling them that genuinely cares about them. It goes back to the relationship piece. But look, when I was a new guy, if you were to ask me when I was a new guy, did I have a big ego? I'd have been like, no way, man. I was a new guy. Like, I'm not going to have a lot. There's no way. Did I have ego? Yes. I had an oversized ego for a new guy. But I also had a platoon commander who really trusted me and let me run a lot of things. And I had a platoon chief who was just, he's my best friend on the planet. He's the freaking man to this day. And he actually used the indirect approach on me to show me that I had ego. And it was like the most crushing thing anyone has ever said to me before in my life. So deployment was wrapped up. So we've been together now for 2 years. We were on Mazar-i-Sharif military base up in northern Afghanistan waiting to redeploy. So we had basically a week and a half of waiting for our bird to pick us up. So we're just working out and hanging out on this base all day long. And there's two parts to Mazar-i-Sharif. There's the American side and then like the German-Dutch side. And of course, like the German-Dutch side, super fun. And like the American side is no fun whatsoever. So we would drive over there in the morning to grab food and hang out for a little bit. And we're on one of these drives across there. It's me, him, and a couple other guys. And I think it was about the time when like the first Marvel movies started coming out. So just randomly, the topic of conversation, when you've been on deployment for 11 months, you run out of things to talk about. So the conversation was like, hey, if you could be a superhero, what superhero would you be? And I said, hey, I'd be Batman. And my platoon chief looks at me and he goes, you wouldn't be Batman. And I was like, yeah, I would be. He goes, no, you wouldn't, because you wouldn't be comfortable wearing that mask because it means nobody would know who you were. And man, dude, my soul, my soul just got freaking crushed. But it was his way kind of indirectly of telling me, you got a big ego, man.
Yeah.
And you got to get that thing in line. He had been there as a platoon chief to put me back in check where I needed to be put back in check, but he knew my next job was going to be a platoon commander. So it was his, parting gift to me of saying like, you've got a couple things you need to work on to be prepared for that role.
And I think another cool thing, and it's not cool in the moment, but you go from being this entry level student with 200 some dudes. We were slimmed down from I think 214 by Tuesday of week. We were down to 19.
Yeah.
We graduated with 26. You know what I mean? So you go through this process from being like one of many to like, all right, you at least have validated you're a hard dude and you can be taught things and you can, comprehend information and perform to at least some extent. So you graduate, right? And you get this big old gold trident on and you think you're the freaking man. Not really, but for that moment, it's and then, okay, you either go to your West Coast or you go to the East Coast across the country and you check in a couple weeks later and you're a new guy all of a sudden. And for us, I'm sure you guys, same thing, like they actually pulled our birds like in the troop space. And for our platoon, we had they spray painted them blue and we locked them in a bird cage in the platoon space. So for anyone listening that's not in the military, things that are blue symbolize that it's like inert, that it can't harm something. So if someone has a blue gun, it means it's like a fake gun, or like a blue grenade, it's a fake grenade. So they spray painted the birds blue to show that you guys are not even, like, you're inert as a man. You are not dangerous, right? And then we had to go through the whole workup and then re-earn our tridents back on deployment, which we actually got ours on Omaha Beach or Utah Beach in Normandy on deployment in the rain in February, which was awesome. I won't go into the details, but you can probably guess how that went.
I'm sure.
So there was a way of instilling immediate humility to make sure you don't come in thinking you're some badass. They immediately knock you down a few notches, and then you're the one getting there early, making coffee, like you're doing all those like kind of monotonous tasks and earning your keep. So it really, when you look at it, it takes you like close to 4 years to really feel like you finally made it, which is a really long time. Like by that second platoon, then you're like, okay, I can kind of like relax a little bit. It's not like you've made it, but at least so that vetting period is so long. And even some guys would get in trouble in their first platoon as new guys and get their bird pulled for good. You know what I mean? So you're never really out of the woods.
Oh yeah.
And then of course that the guys want to go to the next level and screen, they're right back in that kind of student mode. And then it's this crazy vicious cycle of like, as soon as you think you've maybe made it, they knock you down a few notches. And I think that ultimately grooms guys to have humility because they've you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It keeps the egos in check. Whereas like, you compare that to like an NFL team, right? A rookie coming in, first round draft pick. Yeah, they fuck around with them a little bit, but this guy's got a $40 million contract. He's the first round pick. So he's coming, you know what I mean? And they don't even have the ability to do that because it's like, all right, well, we know that guy has to play. He's the first round quarterback that we drafted, you know what I mean? 100%. And this and that, and he's already like a little diva. So I love that about, what we did, because even though like, obviously I hated some of it, but I was like, this is kind of badass how they do this. You know what I mean?
There's definitely the pecking order in the SEAL teams. Yeah. And as a new guy, when you show up, it's just learn. Just
shut your mouth and learn.
Yeah. You can contribute. You're going to have to contribute, actually. When I was a platoon commander, 21-man platoon, 13 new guys in that platoon. Our new guys had to contribute.
Yeah.
They had to. So empowering them and training them as quickly as possible to get them to a place where they could make the right decisions was super important for us. Because back in the day, you would have maybe like 4 new guys in a platoon.
We only had 4.
4, yeah.
18 guys, 4 of us were new. So
imagine having 13 new guys. And by the end of our platoon, man, they were like my best performers. The new guys were. Yeah. They were we were depending upon them for so much. But it was because they came in with very humble, like, let's learn type attitude versus, I've arrived type attitude. When we got back from our first deployment, you remember it was 11 months. So usually what happens is you graduate buds, you check into your first team. That team is there. They're there. So you check in day 1. I check into day 1. I'm walking in my platoon space. And it doesn't matter how bad I think I am. My platoon's there to put me in check if I need to be put in check. Well, we weren't there. So new guys checked in and they had 6 months at the team with nobody
waiting
to
for
put
you
them
guys.
in check.
Oh, geez.
They were going to sniper school. They were going to breacher school. They were getting quals that guys on their second and third platoons would kill to have. There was a little bit of issue that second go round for me at that team because a lot of those new guys, they didn't have the check. And I'm not saying like a physical hard check, which sometimes that happens.
Yeah.
But there is that check that needed to happen when you're a new guy checking in and you've got all this bravado and ego. There was some issues at that team where some new guys, were walking around with an overinflated sense of self-worth because they didn't receive that check right off.
Yeah. I remember the first day I checked in. You show up in your blues and then you go change out or whatever. And I was in the platoon space just like acting busy on a computer because I was just scared and
like terrified to make eye contact with anybody.
Like I don't know anyone's name, and
Yeah.
this big motherfucker walks in, 6'7", 265 pounds, sleeve tattoos. I think he has skeletons all over his arms, which I guess I do now. So maybe I became that a product
First
of my
impression, yeah.
a product of my environment, you'll say. And he walks straight into the back office and slams the door. And I look at the guy next to me. I go, "Who's that?" And he goes, "That's our platoon chief." And I was like, "Oh fuck,
Yeah, game on.
that dude is scary." That's the scariest man I've ever seen. And it turns out he was awesome and led great. I mean, he was like so much respect for him. But that first moment, that was my check of like, all right, dude, you better keep your shit tight because shit just got real. Graduation is over, and you're in the next phase of this, and you're about to get it. Yeah, man, good times. When I know you were a COO of the construction company.
Yep.
Was that, how long did you do that? And I guess one of my questions is, since you transitioned out of the teams, and I think this is for anyone transitioning maybe from a military job into the civilian world, did you have a difficulty adapting to kind of the new normal of employees? Because I think that's something, and I've been vocal and open about this with Tony, and we've talked about this in the podcast before. It is hard to adapt to kind of the new normal of human, because like particularly we were in that environment, in the teams for a while. You get used to that's just how you communicate. And I think there's a lot of efficiencies to how we all communicate.
Yeah.
But it's also not maybe socially acceptable in the civilian world. Just being very direct. If someone's effed up, like, you call them out, you fix them. Now, obviously in a normal workplace, you can't conduct yourself like that because it's just not the right environment. And I had a little bit of difficulty adapting to that, at least as far as the expectations you put on other people, because they're not, it's not a bunch of team guys anymore. Not to say it's just a different vibe, because we're lucky here. I think my transition was probably way easier than most, that like our team is freaking bunch of rock stars, and we just had our prep meeting, and like everyone, we have a crazy dynamic group that is all type A. But for maybe someone that's going into, going to Wall Street or something, and you're at, you know what I mean? Or a consulting job. And then, your coworker, some 25-year-old who just got his MBA, who thinks he's hot shit. And that's your, and you were just, you just did, a few combat tours and 12 years in the team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Adjusting to that new workplace dynamic. Do you see that at all with maybe in personal experience, or for any of the consulting you've done, of those particular guys or girls that like now have to realize, okay, we got to recalibrate how we view this?
It's not so much for my own personal transition, because the construction tech company was founded by two of our former teammates.
Okay. All
so,
right.
But, we very quickly, they're probably up to like 70 employees right now, and only a handful of them were in the military. So, quickly we had all types of different walks of life in there. But the culture that we set kind of set the tone for everybody that was walking in. It was not a culture of being overtly direct to people. And some people, let's be honest, some people use the term direct to mean they're a freaking prick, is what they, I'm just very direct. No, you're a jerk is what you are. Like you're not direct. You're just kind of an a-hole. So that can be one type of scenario, is the direct person. But for us, that transition was fairly easy, because we just treated everybody like you would want to be treated. We had the decentralized command model going on. We hired, and also, for us, we were in control of hiring. So it wasn't like I was walking into a scenario where I had to, collaborate with a bunch of people that we didn't sort of screen to begin with. But even then, we weren't screening people out because they were sensitive. We wanted our biggest thing was teamwork. Can you be a good teammate? And are you a self-starter? Like, we don't want to have to micromanage people. We don't have time for that. Now, working with different companies in my position in Echelon Front, it's one of the questions I just know for a fact I'm going to get when I go work with a company. And it's usually going to be someone with gray hair that asks the question, which is something along the lines of, this generation just doesn't want to do this. This generation is soft. This generation can't take criticism, whatever the case may be. So, look, are there some truths to the generational questions? Yes. Different generations have some differences. I think they're vastly overstated. And any generation that thinks for 1 second that the generation ahead of them wasn't saying the exact same thing about them is 1,000% wrong. What does every person in the SEAL team say about their buds class?
Hardest one.
Last hard buds class.
Ours
right?
actually was the hardest one, but okay.
There's all these new guys. Every batch of new guys is these new guys. Even from the guys who were new guys at last tour, are these freaking new guys.
Or you claim that the newer guys' training was easier.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Which, hey, as someone that ran the third phase of training, it's just not true. Like, it's 100% not true. But like, yeah, the training was just easy. No, it's not.
These guys are soft.
Yeah, this new generation that's coming up. So it's a thing that happens, right? It's just when I was in the platoon commander's course, we had a World War II vet who was a Pearl Harbor survivor come and talk to us. He was 99 years old, sharp as a tack. You know, his recall was mind blowing. It was probably better than mine as a 27-year-old. It was that good. So at the end of his kind of telling us his story and all the lessons that he learned throughout his life, we got to ask him some questions. And I asked him the question, hey, you are very rightly described as the greatest generation. And then I asked him, did your parents think that you guys were the greatest generation? And he just started laughing. He was like, no, absolutely not. And he's like, our parents said the same things that your parents said about you. And then he broke it down and he said, and every generation since Plato has been saying the same thing. And he was like, you can go back and read. And I did. I went and read some of Plato and Aristotle's quotes, and they're saying the exact same things that we say now. No joke. Their music's terrible. They dress funny. Like the exact same things that we're saying. So this discussion is not something new. Now, can it present challenges? Yes. There definitely can be leadership challenges. Just like there was leadership challenges when we started coming into the work. Probably not as much for the military because there's kind of a forge, if you will. But if we would have went right into the civilian sector right off the bat, our generation would have to be the generation before us would have to navigate those exact same challenges.
Yep.
So it just becomes a leadership challenge. But the way that you lead people is the exact same. It doesn't matter if there's a 70-year-old difference in your age. It doesn't matter if you're in the military, you're out of the military. People are people. If you have good relationships with people, things typically work out a little bit better. If you are a good communicator and you know what they're thinking and they know what you're thinking, and you can describe to them in a method that they can pick up on what needs to get done, why it needs to get done, why it's important to the team, why it's important to them. If you can stay detached and not get emotional and like these soft millennial snowflakes, I guess we're probably all technically millennials.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
But these snowflakes, if you can stay detached, and then if you can empower them to contribute and use their talents, they're going to be good teammates. Because look, they're not coming into work not wanting to be successful. And they might have some bad habits or some habits that we don't agree with, that we might want to show them why that's not necessarily the recipe for success here. But how do you get them to be open to that? It's not by trying to force it down their throats. It's by building a relationship with them, being a good teammate, being a good leader, where you build that influence with them.
When you can use it for a mirror for yourself too, to say, and you're describing this already, is like, okay, instead of me pointing the finger at them and saying something's wrong with them, what is it that I haven't developed the range and to be able to communicate in a way that resonates with them? Because you can feel that in a conversation, and it's so easy, like we kicked off with, it's so easy to start to point the finger and say, oh, it's because they don't understand what I understand, or they don't work as hard as I do. Whereas the opposite of that is to say, like, I noticed in that conversation, whatever I was saying did not resonate with them. So instead of me pointing the finger at them, how can I approach this in a different way that all of a sudden the conversation starts to change, and then the relationship builds from there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, leadership is a mirror. It's like, I'm trying this. I'm not getting the desired end state. What do I need to fix? How do I need to change things to figure out how I can get this person to where I am? If you really look at, if you were to ask me what is leadership, just boil it down to one thing. It's influence. It's the ability of someone to influence somebody else. And how do I have influence with people? It's not by being direct, right? It's not by trying to force them to do something. It's by having a good relationship with them, being a good communicator, showing them that I care about their success, and being a good mentor. And one of the things that probably too frequently I have to point out with people is, well, this is the way that it just is. This is the way that it's always been. That, this is how it was when I came into the workplace. And then I'll just ask them, whoever's saying that, I'll ask them this question: did you like that experience? And what do they all say? No, it was miserable. Okay, well, why are you trying to force that?
Yeah.
You can change it. And I'm not saying they get away with whatever they want, But if you didn't like the experience of getting talked down to and berated and yelled and screamed at, why on earth would you try to treat this other person in that same way? Like, there's a better way of doing business that's going to make them feel like a part of the team. And that's when you're starting to succeed, is when they feel like they're contributing, when they feel like the people around them have their best interests.
And that's the age-old wrestling match too, is like power versus people. Because when it's like, you can use power to achieve influence, but it's not sustainable. And there's been for thousands of years, we've seen plenty of examples of what that looks like over time. Whereas people, that is sustainable, but it's a tough switch. And especially once you're put into a position of power, that's the subtlety of, you said earlier, you see so many people, you have the title, you have the power now. And it's like a personality switch that all of a sudden it's like, you used to treat people in a different way. Now you're using power because you're able to. And that's something I think we all contain within us, that you have to be self-reflective of. It's not like, oh, you have to be some like aggressive alpha male in order to like abuse power. Yeah. It's subtle, man. And I think as humans, we all contain that within us. And if you don't subtly go in there and look at that, it's going to come out in some weird ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you look at the example that you just gave of your first platoon chief. When he walked into the room, what would you say was your first reaction?
Oh, I was scared shitless.
Yeah.
Dude's a monster.
I'm going to do literally whatever this guy says because I'm scared.
Yes.
By the end of your 2 years together, why were you doing the things that he asked you to do?
Professional respect and trust.
Because you respected him and because you trusted him.
Yeah.
Because he was a great leader. And he wasn't a great leader because he was big and scary and he was forcing you to do things. He was a great leader because he probably empowered you. He probably mentored you. He probably, gave you a lot of room to make some mistakes and learn from the mistakes and then walk you through those things. The power versus the people type thing.
Yeah. One other cool thing he would always do, typically we do this like almost weekly, or after like a big evolution, we would do it like a no rank debrief. I don't know if you guys did that.
Oh yeah.
And that's where it's like, hey, anything goes. We're all basically E5s for this conversation. Yep. What do you guys got? You know what I mean? And that was obviously your opportunity to maybe bring up a bad call a guy made, or, hey, I don't think we should have fucking held left, cleared right. That was a dumb call. Whatever it was. It could be very specific to what we were doing, or more general, just kind of platoon, drama or whatever it was. Yeah. And I thought that was really cool because that kind of disarmed him in the OIC and brought us all down to the same level. And I think guys still in that moment respected chain of command. It's not like we got like out of hand. But it kind of showed, okay, hey, guys, I can be one of y'all for a minute. Let's just kind of lay our cards on the table, air any grievances, and, hey, let's get back to work. Yeah. And I thought that was a really cool thing. That was just a super healthy way to, kind of clean slate something. If there was something lingering or if that needed to be kind of like nipped in the bud, it was that was the time to do it. Hey, sometimes it led to guys putting gloves on and fighting. But that's how we did it. And then it was these shake hands and rock and roll. And that was the culture, right? That's why I loved it, because it was like, this is just man shit. Yeah. And you don't carry that into the next week or whatever. Shake the guy's hand, get a few licks in, and we're on to the next one,
And why do some leaders at least, think that's an approach they're not going to want to take? It's because a couple things. One, their ego. They can't deal with the answers that they're going to get when they open that door. And two, they fear a loss of respect. So if we get in this debrief and I open it up and I allow people to critique me, they're going to point out my mistakes and then I'm going to lose their respect. When you left that first debrief, when it was like, hey, ranks off the table, when you left that, did you leave with less respect or more respect for your leadership?
Definitely more.
Definitely more.
Yeah.
But it's counterintuitive to most people. Like, this is frightening. My ego gets involved. I'm going to lose respect because maybe I made a bad call, and I'm just going to try to either avoid it or just cover it up and not talk about it. But the reality is, how you get more respect from your people is you show them that you're not above them. You're not above critique. You show them that, one, it's okay to make mistakes as long as you can learn from those mistakes, which is why they're all there. And if you're willing to do that as the leader, your people are going to be willing to do that as well. If we're not willing to look at ourselves and criticize ourselves and be open to their feedback, why would they ever be open to the feedback that I might try to give them?
You know what the coolest thing that came of that I wasn't expecting? You know what it ended up turning into? A bunch of guys rogering up about mistakes they made on that run. Yes. And that's all it was. Hey, I dropped the fucking stairwell. You guys didn't see it, but I shouldn't have that. And then another guy chimes in, hey, like, whatever. I got a jam and I didn't. Whatever. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, guys are literally confessing to mistakes that no one would have caught. And then it did foster an environment of not being afraid to make a mistake because it became so open. It almost became like a badge of honor if you rogered up about something that no one knew about. Like, oh, well, you fucked that up. Well, let me tell you what I fucked up. You know what I mean?
I'll trump that.
Yeah. I had a magazine fall out of my gun that you guys didn't get, something ridiculous. And that was just really cool. And I think just that general theme of commanding or leading in a way where the people below you aren't afraid to make a mistake will make them so much more effective at their job. And I think that's huge in sports too. If coaches that can facilitate that for their players, because there was always the coach that like you were terrified to make a mistake, and that just that you just then you play scared and
tense,
or it's like, hey, screw it, we're playing with house money, have a good time, be aggressive. If you're gonna fail, do it aggressively. And then, just the overall performance goes up so much. So I thought that was a really cool, like, totally unexpected outcome of those debriefs.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, hey, dude, I saw you do this. It went totally internal. And what a great way to kind of foster a culture of ownership. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The best tool that any team can do for their people, for their team, for the performance of their team is debriefing. And if you're not debriefing, if you have any type of team, if you're running a business, a sports team, whatever it is, if you're not debriefing, you're wrong. You're 100% wrong. And the power of a good debrief, which you just walked us through, Bear, is a perfect example of a good debrief. It's not about pointing the finger and saying, well, Tony, you screwed this up and you screwed that up. It's about owning our own mistakes so that everybody in the room on the team can learn from our mistakes and we can get better and better and better. When you have a culture of debriefing like that, a couple of really powerful things happen. One is people get comfortable talking about their own personal mistakes, which is not normal. People don't like sitting down in a room with their peers and talking about the things that they've screwed up. We typically want to keep those things hidden. But when you have an environment where the team is all doing that together, people feel empowered to talk through those mistakes because they realize it's not about people pointing the finger and saying you suck. It's about the whole team improving together and getting better. The second thing that happens is if people know that they're going to be debriefing at the end of a day, end of a shift, end of a week, whatever it is, and they understand the purpose of that debrief is to identify mistakes so that we can all get better, people start to look for mistakes so they can bring them up in the debrief and fix them together. You go through an assaults block and a platoon that is really good at debriefing, they are bringing up and identifying mistakes that the instructors don't even catch. Mm-hmm. Platoons that don't take the debrief seriously, they don't really get that much better. 6 months, very focused training to get them better. If they're not debriefing well, they kind of stagnate. Yeah. The platoons that debrief really well over that 6 months, man, they would leave really, really sharp, really sharp.
So good. I want to close on Primal Beef.
Yeah.
So obviously you started a company called Primal Beef, farm raised beef, and I know we talked about this already, but in the Shenandoah Valley, you talked about like how the soil is like the perfect blend of like minerals. So it like, farm raised stuff. Give us the quick rundown on Primal Beef, like what inspired it, where can we get it? Yeah. And just the quick backstory on that.
Yeah. So the inspiration for it really was, I grew up on a small farm in Texas. We didn't have any cattle. We're probably the only farmers around us that didn't have cattle. We had horses, which as a kid, I wasn't really a big fan of because it wasn't like, I could go saddle them and ride whenever I wanted to. They would just work for me. It was just home from school, do this with the horses, do that with the horses. So I didn't necessarily take full advantage of growing up on a horse ranch basically. So, but I really enjoyed the experience of growing up on a ranch, on a farm, and having that freedom, having the room to roam. My parents were basically like, just go outside and do whatever the heck you want as long as, you don't hurt your sisters. Then you join the Navy, go in the SEAL teams, live in San Diego for 15 years. There's good things and bad things about any city, but you're not living on a ranch in San Diego. You have very limited confines. You have a couple 100 square feet basically of lot size. So when we got out, I had 5 kids, and my wife and I's goal was to give them an experience similar to our upbringing. So we moved to this town in the Shenandoah Valley where my wife's family has settled, and we bought just about 60-acre farm and have a bunch of cattle on there. And it was mainly to give my kids the experience that we had growing up, give them freedom, give them the lessons of hard work, all those things that happen when you have to run a farm. And then I started to realize the more that I got to know the cattle industry, the more I got to know how ranches operate, how farmers operate, just how actually broken our food system is. You know, it used to be if you wanted milk or you wanted beef, you would go to your farmer. And even people that were living in cities, they had access to good quality farm-raised beef, farm-raised produce, stuff like that. That's not really the case anymore. A startling amount of beef in America is imported from overseas. And the beef that's not imported, 4 major conglomerations control something like 85% of the beef production inside of America. And they're not necessarily the best beef on the planet. You know, the way that they're raising that beef is not really the most sustainable. It's not good for the cattle. It's not good for the land. It doesn't equal the best quality beef. So I was surrounded by these farmers that were raising beef like beef should be raised. Pastures, you know, giving them good food. And the more that I realized that our system was broken, the more I realized that the tools to connect people with the proper way of raising beef and good farm-raised beef were there. We have the tools. So that was the genesis for Primal Beef was my family now could take advantage of where we lived. We could take advantage of knowing exactly where our beef came from. I wanted to be able to give that experience to anybody in the country. So that was the genesis of Primal Beef. And all of our beef comes from one farm right in the middle of the Shenandoah Valley. It's not my farm. My farm's not big enough to feed America. So we partnered with a rancher who just does a phenomenal job of raising beef, and his beef is unreal. So anytime you order from Primal Beef, you know it comes from one farm, which means you know the practices that farmer uses, you know what your beef was eating, you know they're not getting any added hormones, they're not getting any mRNA, any of that nonsense. It's all natural beef. I can tell you the name of every single person that put their hands on that beef on its way to your door. So the goal of Primal was to basically connect people with the knowledge and understanding of where their food's coming from again.
Yeah, Bear's heard me nerd out on this before, but I think in the next 10 to 20, I hope sooner, the recognition of what we've done to our soils here in the U.S. will be something everybody's talking about. And if we don't make some decisions really quick to start to mitigate the effects we're having on it, we're going to be in real trouble. So, I mean, as you said, our reliance already on external sources, but so I grew up on a 200-acre farm. We had cattle. Yeah. So just seeing now people talking about it when I've been a nerd on it for so long, it's good, man, because it needs to happen. And kudos to you, because we need more and more of that. And it's kind of sad the direction we've went. I mean, with food in general, but that could be a whole nother podcast.
Yeah. I mean, there's 50-year low in cattle production in the United States of America, which there's absolutely no reason for that. I shouldn't say that. There's lots of reasons that's happening. There's no real reason that's happening. The reasons it's happening is they're making all this legislation, or our country's making all this legislation for whatever vein they're doing it from, whatever their reasonings are, and without getting too political on the podcast.
Ridiculous reasons, I'll add.
It's all really bad for the farmer.
Yeah.
And farming's already hard enough. You know, you go and talk to anyone who owns a farm, and it's not a glamorous lifestyle. You know, there's all these Instagram people that like to, you know, go out and work their fields in like their nicest Sunday clothes. I'm like, that's complete bullcrap. That's not what farming looks like. That's not what a real farmer looks like. Sun up, sundown work. You're never taking vacations. You're dealing with things that you can't predict all the time. It's hard work. And now you've got legislation that's making it even more difficult because prices for all the things that you need to run your farm are higher at an all-time high. There's a lot of people with a lot of money that are buying lots of agricultural land and not to use it for agricultural. We're allowing foreign governments to come in and buy agricultural land. And the kids just aren't taking over the farm. So the average age of the American farmer right now is 63 years old.
Jeez.
The next generation's not wanting to take that on. Now, it's a travesty because the SEAL teams were so fulfilling. It's all I ever wanted to do. I've never been happier in my life. And part of it is I get to spend all my time with my family now. But awesome. A part of it is living on a farm is amazing, man. Is there hard work? Yes. Is there some frustrations? Yes. Cattle get out. There's some frustration there. But it's so fulfilling on a level that almost nothing else I've ever done in my life is fulfilling. But the deck is stacked against farmers, and something has got to change. And we're hoping that by opening up a vein for people to reconnect with their food, that we can play some small part in helping shift the tide a little bit here.
Yeah, and I think the cool thing with the development of like the direct consumer boom, online, it now allows any Joe Schmo to actually regain access to what was lost, right, through companies like yours. And I think, not to get a dork out on the nutritional profile too much, but the farm raised beef is so much better for you than just the run of the mill stuff. When it looks like, I think, is it the breakdown of the omega-3 versus omega-6 like ratio. I remember I used to dork out about this like when I was a CrossFit
and it's more what he said in there too, of like, it's the nutritional profile. There is a difference, but you could make an argument it's not the big thing is what's not in it, meaning the bullshit that you get in beef that's just raised from like a huge factory farm. And it's not being talked about either, but that'll be another thing that slowly but surely, and people are talking about it, but it's not mainstream, that we start to realize the shit we're putting in our body when you're eating that type of meat.
Yeah, and I think as head of the household, it's our job to feed our family the right stuff, right? Like it's on us to educate ourselves on that and make sure what you're putting on the dinner table is right. So how's it been going so far? You guys, is it obviously anything you got to start is tough sledding, but it's all direct to consumer, right?
All direct to consumer.
Okay.
Yeah, all direct to consumer off the website, just primalbeef.com. It's been going well. Our biggest hurdle right now is we know for a fact the beef is amazing. The feedback we've got from our customers, and I'm sure every business says this, but best beef they've ever had before. So we know the product itself is the best you can get. You should feel good about ordering from Primal Beef for all sorts of different reasons we can get into. The challenge has just been, and this has been way harder than I thought it would be, is getting that first box to somebody's doorstep.
Yeah, customer acquisition,
the marketing aspect of it, all of those different things has been much more difficult than I thought it would be. Once it's there, people are ordering again. And we have a subscription base, or you can order one-offs. It doesn't matter to us.
Okay.
But people are reordering. And it might not be every month. Not everybody has 7 people that eat in their household every single night. If it's a single guy or gal, they don't need 20 pounds of beef. Yeah. I mean, you should be eating 20 pounds of beef a month, but they might not need 20 pounds of beef per month. So they are reordering. So the thing that we're trying to overcome now and figure out is just how do we get the first box to the doorstep? Because we know once we do that, the beef speaks for itself, and the things that the company stands for speaks for itself as well. So, raising cattle the right way, the things we're not putting in the cattle, the things that the cattle are eating, but then the processing. All of our cattle are processed at one place in Virginia, and that place is bringing jobs back to this town in Virginia. They're giving people the skill set, the butchering that they can hang their hat on. They have a program, a work release program, where they're getting people that have made some bad decisions in their life, ended up in jail. People aren't willing to take a risk on these people. Nobody wants to hire them. Well, Seven Hills, who's our partner in processing, they're hiring these people as like a vocation.
Nice.
And they train them up and they give them a skill set that they can use throughout the rest of their life. And they're giving them employment. And, I've been down there multiple times to see these guys, and you talk to them and it has changed their lives. The fact that someone has been willing to take a risk and give them a second chance and give them a skill. It's helped them reintegrate back into society and given them a purpose. And then the last thing that we do is we wanted this to be a company that, one was providing quality beef to the American public, good, clean quality beef, helping out the local farm as well, but also giving back to our community. So we partner with the C4 Foundation, and anytime anybody makes a purchase from Primal Beef, we set a cut of beef aside and we donate that to the C4 Foundation. And the C4 Foundation in turn gives that to SEALs and their families. So that beef is not, we don't hide the cost of that beef in the box or transfer it to the customer. That's a price that myself, Declan, Paul, and Jocko, the guys that started Primal Beef, we're eating that cost because we want to be able to give back in some small way. So people, when the box gets there, they feel good about every single aspect of the company. It's just getting it to the front doorstep has been harder than we thought it would be.
And there's a societal education there of like where people are spending their dollar, because you can go to you go to Walmart and you can buy it for $4.99, or yours is $10.99. And what anyone I talk to, and I think like you realize is that like, if you're going to spend money anywhere, it's like your food is you are your food. Like you should be spending it there. But societally right now, that's not how it goes. And people would rather have a Netflix subscription than that. And it's like no judgment there. Like, of course, like we all have the things are the things we enjoy, but like, if there's anything you should be spending a little more money on, it's what you're putting in yourself and your kid's body. And that's like a pillar of kind of, I think it needs to be a human.
Absolutely. And the gap between the Walmart prices and our prices, it's about like that right now.
Okay.
Because the price for us to, get the cattle and raise and purchase the cattle has gone up for us, but we're determined to not pass that cost over to the public because we want them to still be able to afford this. If you look at some of our competition, we're less expensive than our competition, but we're definitely going to be more expensive than your local market for the reasons that you just talked about. The way that the cattle are being raised, the way that they're being processed, getting it to the client's doorstep, all of those things, it just comes with a cost that we can't compete with Walmart. But that beef at Walmart, you don't even know what kind of cow that beef at Walmart is. And odds are it's not actually a cow that was probably raised for beef consumption. A lot of that beef is dairy cows that at the end of their life, when they stop producing milk, those big companies, they're not altruistic. They're not putting those cows out to pasture and letting them enjoy the rest of their life. They're processing them. And a Holstein cow was not meant for beef production. It was meant for milk. And there's a huge difference in quality of beef, the tenderness, the flavor, the marbling in, a dried up dairy cow than there is with, all American Black Angus or, Wagyu or whatever else, real beef cows were raised for.
Wow. That's a good point. Well, I think, we obviously have been at this for a while now. One thing I'll tell you is the values you're leading with your company go a long way with the consumer. I think what we're seeing more now than ever is the consumer likes to align with something. In a perfect world, of course, they like the product, but then they align with the values and the ethos of the company. So the fact that obviously you being a veteran-owned company and giving back to a good cause, and then the source of course, the beef, and honestly just the backstory is cool behind it. Over time, I think while customer acquisition is always challenging, if you keep customers because of those things, you're slowly going to build this big foundation of a business. And it's a bit of a long game. I mean, the first 6 years here at Born Primitive, it was just Mal and I, right? And I mean, that was our play. Like, hey, let's just try to get in front of the customers and, meet our customers. We'd go to every CrossFit event we could and just have a little tent and a card table. And over time, we kept most of those customers, right? Because of how, the values of the company. And so you're doing it right. And obviously, the longer you'll do it, you'll learn more about customer acquisition. A lot of ours is on Facebook and Instagram, and what I mean? We have a huge strategy around that. But all of that, is for nothing if those things I spoke about aren't in place. So the fact that you have that is really cool, and I think that'll absolutely give you the edge to be successful.
Awesome.
So we're stoked for you, man.
Man, it's we're excited. We're excited to be able to offer it, to the American public. It really does mean the ability to feed our fellow man. It's huge. I mean, it's cool. Huge. The fulfillment and the joy that we get out of knowing that we're putting the best beef you can get on hardworking people's plates every single night is just unlike anything we've ever been a part of. And, maybe a good way to wrap this up would be to flip the script a little bit with how we started the podcast with you saying a lesson that I was able to give you when you were first starting your journey. Well, flip the script, here we are now 12 years removed from that. And you gave me, when I reached back out to you, you gave me a lot of good advice about primal beef that I just had no frame of reference for. So, the protege and the master relationship we're flipped around there, man. So
I love that.
And
that's cool.
And how does that come about? Tie it all back to leadership. It was through the relationship,
yes,
right?
Yes.
If I would have just been a prick to you when you were in buds,
totally.
Which there's plenty of instructors that take that mindset, you might not have been as willing to help me out when I reached back out to you. So,
well, it was funny because, because I knew you as Lieutenant Glass. I never knew your first name.
Yeah.
Right. So when I saw Sean Glass, and I think you had texted me or emailed me, I can't remember. Yeah. And I responded to him. I said, wait a second, is this the Lieutenant Glass from Third Phase? And then he was like, yeah. And I was like, oh, hell yeah. Like, let's get on a call. And you're 100% right. I remembered, like, you know what I mean? that experience and was like, hell yeah, I want to help this guy because you were obviously dedicated to training. I got to give you a quick third phase story before we close out.
Yeah, man. Hell yeah.
I don't know if you even know this happened, but when we were out at third phase, it was before our first night IAD run. So for those that don't know what that is, that's like we're going to patrol and then they shoot at us, and it was like our night run, right?
Yeah.
So that one of the instructors came up to me and he's like, Bear, he's like, all right, we're going to leave you guys in the classroom. Like, get the boys fired up. Like, you guys got to set the fucking tone. Like, when you get contacted, like that's the, the first volley of fire. Like, he's trying to, you know what I mean?
Hype you up, man.
So
it's your first go.
We brought in a boom box, and the instructors gave us kind of like 30 minutes. It was like, we got there like 30 minutes before like the safety brief. And I got out in front of the classroom and I was using a football analogy of like the opening kickoff of like, all right, in an opening kickoff of a football game, like, if you're one of those guys covering a kickoff, that's your time to light someone up and set the tone of what that game's going to be like, particularly in football. If you get lit up on the first play and someone ear holes you, you're like, oh, damn, this team hits, right? So that was like, I was using like a college football analogy that was so silly, but at the time, that's the best I got, right? So I'm in the front of the classroom, and I was on one end of the classroom, and so I had like, you don't need to kick off when they're like, oh, and they go, oh, right when the ball gets kicked. I had them do that. And I was running across the classroom where the podium was in the front left. You remember the classroom?
Oh, yeah.
And as I got close to the wall, I realized I ran out of room and I couldn't stop. So I just went shoulder down right into the wall and went through the wall into the classroom next door, right?
Yeah.
So I literally, thank God I didn't hit the studs. I went between the studs, a human-sized hole. I crawled back through the wall with drywall all over me, and like everyone's looking at me in disbelief of like, what the fuck did you just do? You just literally ran through the wall, literally.
Yeah, which is what we tell you guys to do.
And of course, so when you're in training, you always have two guys on standby watch. So if the instructor's coming, you basically warn the crew, like, all right, lock it up because the instructors are coming. And when you see them, you yell, stand by, and then everyone stands at attention. All right, lock it up, right? So you always have two guys on standby duty. So the two standby guys at the door, right when I crawl back through the wall, they go, stand by, meaning the instructors were on the way, like walking across that little grinder there, right? So I'm standing there, drywall all over my camis. There's crumbled drywall all over the floor, a human-sized hole just left of the podium. The instructor walks up, briefs us the safety brief at the podium the entire time. It's literally 3 feet from him, and he does not notice it, right? And we're all like, what do we do? Yeah. Like, do we tell him? Like, how does he not notice? There's a fucking hole in the wall next to him. You know what I mean? I'm in the front row dying. I'm still like trying to scrape the drywall like off my shoulder. Guys are dying. So the instructor leaves. He says, all right, be out front in 15 minutes, get your pull weapons, like whatever, right? And we're all like, holy shit, he didn't even notice, right? So we think we're like off scot-free. So we did the runs and it was fun and it was, whatever. And then we put our weapons away and it's like close to midnight and the instructors are in the hell box, like doing their thing. And we're like, all right, that we like bad news does not get better with time, right? So I said, all right, I need a buddy. We walked down to the hell box and I banged on the hell box door, try to project confidence, man up,
of course,
big chest, like just own it. And I was like, I won't say his name, but instructor so-and-so, I was like, you remember how you told me like I need to get the boys amped up before this IAD? He was like, yeah. And I was like, well, I think I did that, but I might have crossed the line a little bit. And he was like, what do you mean? I said, I got to come show you something. So we walked across, went into the classroom, and I showed him the hole, and he just shook it. He's like, God damn it, Hanlon, you're not an E5. You can't be doing this shit. So the next day, me and the CB, after dinner, had to patch that drywall. You know what I mean? And of course, it was all shitty. Like, so I don't know if anyone has been to the third phase classroom in a while. If there's a giant human-sized patch job to the left of the podium, that was my meathead ass literally running through the wall because I'm an idiot and was trying to motivate my guys in a really weird way.
Probably fired. I was
going to say that had to have worked.
It was one of those things. I stepped back through the wall, like back into the classroom, and it was silent. Everyone's like looking at each other like, what the hell? And then everyone just starts going, yeah. Like, it was like, what in the hell? So if that pretty much sums me up in one story right there.
That's a big ass head hole in the wall.
I mean, can you imagine if I would have hit a stud? I would have knocked myself out. I mean, because it was like last second. All right, I'm going shoulder down. I'm going through this thing. Thank God I did. You know what I mean? But
that's awesome.
We'll close out on that. But hey, thanks for making the trip down. For those listening, hey, if you guys want to support a veteran-owned business, head to primalbeef.com. Check that out. Obviously we have choices in where we spend money. And I think now more than ever, it's cool to align with brands and companies that have the right values. And you guys absolutely have that. So if you want to feed your family what they deserve, make that happen. And yeah, thanks Sean for coming down, and good to reconnect.
Yeah, man. Thanks for
All right,
having me.
buddy.
Pleasure
Thanks.
to see you again, man.
Heck yeah.
Tony.
Thanks, Sean.